Hey everyone, welcome to the week 11 lecture on Locative Games. So this week we're going to be talking about locative play, location-based mobile games and play that is mediated by mobile media or the location that you're playing on. So we're thinking here about technologies like GPS as a feature that allows for play to be changed, digital play to be changed based on where you are in the world. And so our focus is primarily on play in urban spaces, because that's where there's a lot of interesting political and social work going on. The required reading for this week traces the histories of urban play, looking at technologies and cultural practices as far back as the 18th century. This week we're asking questions like, how do location-based gaming change how we think about games and play? How can they shape our interactions with space? And throughout this lecture, I'll be discussing serious location games, pointing at some opportunities for you to potentially design a serious location game. That is a game that leverages the way that location-based gaming changes our experience of space towards a serious purpose, education or persuasion. So just like our mobile media has a history long before smartphones, location-based play can be situated on a trajectory of cultural practices and technologies as far back as the 18th century. Jussi Parikka and Jarkko Suominen explore the origins of mobile gaming in the industrialization of travel in the 19th century. Scholar Wolfgang Schivelbusch argues that the railway destroyed travelers' traditional contacts with their environment, whereas before people had walked or been on horseback in groups. Travel was a social activity. You would find people who you would travel from one town to the next with. Movement became this new non-space, but also one which was consuming an increasing timeshare of everyday life, as people increasingly used train travel for a work commute or had to travel long distances to get to their places of work and primary living, and then where their families might be outside of the industrializing cities. Angelo Janovet, who is a Spanish diplomat writing in 1895, wrote, "The man who travels 50 hours by train does not travel but is delivered. He does not do anything except tolerate." And I'm sure those of us who have tolerated airplane travel can recognize this, in that there was a transformation of travel because of this new technology, because of the train, as travel as this thing that it was enjoyed, was a journey in itself, had reward, connection to the environment, connection to other people, into something much more rapid, but also taking up more and more of our time as we traveled more and more. So a new mobile media was introduced at this time to reclaim some of this time: books. But books had to be technically and culturally adapted for these new mobile environments. In Britain, especially for the higher social classes, reading books was already a way to cope with the experience of being industrially transported. Sitting monotonously in your horse carriage is similar to sitting monotonously in your train carriage, but this was new for the lower classes. Literature became this tool for tolerating inconvenience, something we might call entertainment, perhaps. And this was often used in railway book marketing for travellers. Third and fourth class carriages, which were less closed off, people had a much lower income and were also travelling a lot more. And so the books had to be technically and culturally adapted for these new environments. Railway books were printed with narrower columns, which minimized the effects of the movement of the carriage on your ability to read or perhaps feel sick. And less complex horror stories and thrillers became the most popular genre, with these lower social classes in busier carriages where you're more likely to be interrupted, right? It's much more difficult to read like proper literature if you can't really concentrate, but horror stories and thrillers became more popular. But this time also coincided with the rise of newspapers, a more casual, mobile style of reading that was much more suitable to the mobile reading situations of the train carriage. Mobile gaming systems were also invented and became incredibly popular during these times. Card decks, portable chess sets, and small mobile flipbooks called kineographs became increasingly popular. These are picture series that can be animated through flipbook by flipping the pages. Mobile media and mobile games reclaimed this time, this lost time to the train travel, and reinstated connections between co-travelers. These examples show how mobile media, whether digital or analog, is shaped by and constituted by its mobility, and our experience of mobility is in turn shaped by our mobile media. So some of your readings for this week looks at some of the theoretical and histories of locative urban play. It situates our thinking in the intellectual and artistic 20th century movement of the Situationist International, as well as earlier forms of digital and analog mobile media, such as some pre-smartphone mobile phones as well. One of the earliest forms of urban play is the flaneur. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the idle bourgeois in cities like Paris. So the flaneur had a tendency towards detached but aesthetically attuned observation of the city, which brought the term into the literature of photography, and particularly street photography. So Victor Fournel writes in What One Sees on the Streets of Paris that the flaneur is a roving and impassioned daguerreotype that preserves the least traces and on which are reproduced, with their changing reflections, the course of things, the movement of the city, the multiple physiognomy of the public spirit, the confessions, antipathies, and admirations of the crowd. Essentially, the flaneur was a upper-class bourgeois Parisian who was living off of his estate and didn't have work and responsibilities, who would wander the city in an idle way, observing the city, observing the buildings and the people, detached from the everyday workings of the city. The flaneur had a different experience of that physical environment because of the nature of the way that they were engaging with it. The flaneur symbolized the new multiple dimensions of mobility within modernity: physical, geographic, cultural, and economic mobility. By his mobility, economically enabled, the flaneur re-territorializes the city through a series of playful actions, re-scripting the city and its increasing commodification into a game of modernity in which he both participates and observes. De Souza and Silva continue to write, through his wandering, the flaneur merges the serious space of the city, where a city designed to promote the circulation of people efficiently for the economy, with the ludic activity of the casual walk, therefore eliminating the boundaries of a distinct and separate play space. And so this practice of the flaneur has links to psychogeography, which was a key tactic of the Situationist International. Psychogeography is occupied with exploring the relationship between emotions, behaviour, human consciousness, and subjectivity and the geographical environment. For Guy Debord, an intellectual who was prominent in the Situationist International, the study of the precise laws and specific effects of the geographical environment was interested in the study of the effects of the geographical environment on the emotions and the behaviours of individuals. And what I'm referring to here is the way that we can enter a space and feel like we've been there before, even though we haven't been. Or you can enter a space that you've never been in and know how it is that you're expected to behave. It can give you a feeling of comfort or fear or horror or nervousness or anxiety. Exam halls perhaps come to mind there. But the Situationist International, as a kind of political Marxist movement, was also about playing with and re-territorializing in the same way that the flaneur re-territorialized. And so Guy Debord had this thing that he called the derive, an unplanned journey through a landscape, usually urban, in which participants drop their everyday relations with space and let themselves be drawn by the attractions of the terrain and the encounters that they find there. Another way of articulating it is like a type of urban drifting, a way of experiencing urban space distinct from normal ways that we move. When we move in the city, we're going from one place to another. We're going to buy something, we're going to work. Rarely do we drift through, drawn by the city itself. In a derive, one or more persons during a certain period drop their usual motives for movement and action, their relations, their work, and leisure activities, and let themselves be drawn by the attractions of the terrain and the encounters that they find there. And so what was produced from these new kind of forms of movement were these maps. If we think of a map as a tool to allow the efficient movement through space, the derive allows us to create new maps of the cities. Frank Dresme created a fantastic range of images that embraced a different way of navigating the city of Amsterdam. Project was called Project 360, brought on by his dislike for the tourist maps of the city, creating this collage-like image involving all the aspects of his experience moving through the city, taking into account the elements of the environment that caused these experiences as he moved through it. Following bit, to draw on an example from video games, following bit is a reenactment of Vito Acondi's Following piece, which was originally performed in New York City between October 3rd and October 25th, 1969. Following piece was a part of Streetworks 4, a series of performances and conceptual events sponsored by the Architectural League of New York between October 1st, 31st, 1969. Acondi followed a person for a few minutes, if that person entered a private space or car, or for several hours. If the person went to a cinema or a restaurant, he would continue to follow them. Acondi carried out his performance every day for a month, typing up an account of each pursuit and then sending a report to a different member of the art community. Cole.io's Following Bit is presented today to a broader audience via digital media. This video documents a following performance that took place on the streets of Liberty City in Grand Theft Auto, where the player character follows a non-player character throughout the environment, no longer navigating the city of Liberty City as a criminal or the main character, but following one of the rather dull AI non-player characters in the game. So Guy Debord was a member of the Situationist International, this avant-garde movement in Europe in the mid-20th century. They were anti-authoritarian, leftist, Marxist, mobilizing a strident critique of 20th century capitalism and industrialization. Location-based play, particularly urban play, is often compared to the practices associated with the Situationist International, who argued that advanced capitalism manufactured false desires, literally in the sense of ubiquitous urban advertising and the glorification of accumulated capital, but also more broadly in the abstraction and reification of the more ephemeral experiences of authentic life into things that were commodities. The experimental direction of situationist activity consisted of setting up these temporary environments that are favourable to what they saw as the full fulfilment of true and authentic human desires. The chances are you are already a psychogeographer. What the board was talking about is the way that humans shape their environment and how the environment shapes humans. How you can pick up that vibe from a place you've never been to before and feel it's good or bad. We intuit things about the built and lived environment. And psychogeography is about reacting to and rejecting the enforced ways of being in a space, right? An example is dancing in elevators. If someone got into an elevator next to you and started dancing, we would know that that was wrong. But to do that would be to react to it and reject these rigid conforms of everyday life. So there's some real use here in thinking about the flaneur to thinking about maybe the fauneur, the person whose experience of the city is organized now rather than the decision to go to wander the city as an idle bourgeois, but the person who is organized by the layers and flows of information that are able to flow through the device. The flaneur's reality is mapped by the commercial grids and the communication vectors of the mobile phone. As Armin and Thrift put it, the modern city doesn't just exist as a city, but as a haze of software instruction. Nearly every urban practice is becoming mediated by code. And I think a really good example of this is some of you who might have been walking at home alone in the dark. There's someone following you, or maybe you think that they're following you. What do? You pull your phone out and you call someone. You re-territorialize that space because that's what the phone is allowing you to do. There's also a smartphone app named the Derive that you can download and go on a Derive yourself. You don't necessarily need the smartphone app to do it. They give you simple geography-based directions, such as follow a red vehicle, to create a new experience of an urban environment. There are, of course, some critiques of this concept. Game designer Mary Flanagan critiques the use of these historical metaphors and their use in location-based games. Because even though, as theorists, they were bound by their own time, place, class, language, and ethnicity, Flanagan argues that the situationist internationals can be validly critiqued for not attempting to more deeply question the drift as an activity with class, gender, and ethnic implications. In major cities throughout the world, the homeless, the prostitutes, domestic workers all possess the streets in a way which speaks to economic and social disempowerment. Their drift is a search for labour or an impossibly lengthy commute, as opposed to the rejection of the same oppressive values that the situationist international supplied. We can also offer a similar critique to drawing parallels between the flaneur and the fagneur, where the flaneur was a rich, white, powerful male occupying a city that he owned through his wealth. There were no female flaneurs, right, whose experience of the built environment would be, of course, very different. So in the required reading, Hjorth appropriates Henry Lefebvre's work on social spaces as a means to position play within urban space. Lefebvre thinks about social space as comprised of three interconnected elements. We've got perceived space, conceived space, and lived space, thinking differently about social practices, the representation of space, and how we represent and describe space. This lens for thinking about how play transforms these different aspects of space can be really helpful for articulating how you understand your serious game, to be leveraging the affordances of mobile media for the purpose of for your serious purpose. If you're doing a mobile game, that is. So de Souza argues that if we suggest that playful spaces are a subcategory of social spaces in the realm of social practices, in that they highlight the relationship between daily routine and urban reality. Playful spaces are mostly urban spaces produced by the mobility and interactions of people who inhabit these spaces. So what does location-based gaming actually look like? De Souza and Hjorth basically break it down into three categories: urban games, which use the city space as a game board; location-based games, which use mobile technologies like GPS to facilitate physical digital play; and hybrid reality games, where a digital and physical games occur simultaneously, where there's a digital layer placed over the world. They offer a lot of examples, and I recommend when you're doing the reading to actually look up on YouTube videos of people playing these games to understand them and be able to kind of see what the play of that game looks like. One of the examples is Big Urban Game, a game from, I think, Minnesota, where people had to maneuver these giant unwieldy objects through the city using the kind of barriers of the city, the low-hanging bridges, traffic lights, people, as the kind of providing the challenge for this act of urban play. A lot of these urban games can be situated in the playable city movement, which itself is part of the kind of new games collective that emerged in response to the Vietnam War. So the playable city movement can be seen as this kind of collective response, similar to the situationist and international responding to kind of capitalism and industrialization. Playable city responds to the coldness and anonymity of the urban environment. So playable city are art-based awards that emerged as this counterpoint to over-planning of cities, and that cities that were entirely about utility, aiming to facilitate more friendly and open uses of urban space, which framed play as this utopian ideal. So rather than thinking about play as subverting something, play is actually what we're aiming for. So we're similar here to, as I mentioned before, the New Games movement formed by Stuart Brand in response to the Vietnam War, which was committed to designing experiences within public spaces and exploring what kinds of social and civic possibilities are enabled by public gaming experience such as these. One of my favourites is the 2013 Playable City Award winner Hello Lamppost. Inspired by the idea of the city as a diary, Hello Lamppost encouraged participants to look at everyday objects in the city differently, which basically you could text or use, they put stickers on QR codes on bus stops and phone boxes and lamp posts that allowed you to text or message on Facebook Messenger different objects within the city, bringing to light hidden stories of these objects. By using the kind of pre-existing identifier codes that already labelled a lot of the street furniture across the whole city, which were being used for, there's an issue with this object, people can have these unique conversations. The City of Melbourne did something similar, where they gave each tree in the city an email address. The purpose was that if you felt that there was a danger from the tree, that branch looks like it's about to fall off, you could email the tree and it would be forwarded on to the appropriate person and you would know exactly what tree they needed to come out and check out. But people started writing nice letters to the tree. This new form of communication modality allowed for a lighter and more playful engagement with the city. So big urban game is the one I mentioned before, where players were tasked with moving these giant game pieces throughout the city of Minnesota. It was created to promote visual awareness of the Twin Cities urban environment and frame new perspectives, fresh perceptions, and encourage wide input on how the Twin Cities public realm design could be improved from streets to transit to parks and other urban environments. Citizens could vote for and move giant game pieces along different routes over the city over 5 days, with the piece arriving at the final destination in the shortest time winning. The idea here was both the visibility of the game pieces, but also the participation in voting for the routes was a way to engage people with the territory of the city in a way they might not have otherwise previously. It's kind of a really great way to encourage participation in city planning. So urban games like these we see in Big Urban Game have the ability to transform normalizations of urban spaces into sites for collaborative and politicized play. They show how we can intervene in the regulation of everyday practices and show that urban games function very much like an extension of the derive, disrupting, dislocating, and disordering urban space. So another category of game that D'Souza and Hjorth identify are hybrid reality games. So these are games that have on them layer the physical world with a digital layer. Their example is Pac-Manhattan, and I suggest you jump on YouTube and watch some videos of people playing it, which was Pac-Man gameplay within the actual streets of Manhattan. A person dressed as the Pac-Man, wearing yellow, tried to avoid being eaten by other players dressed in the various primary colours of the ghost characters in Pac-Man. In a remote location, players in a control room were in constant contact with street players via cell phones, updating the street player's physical location on a digital map of the city back in 2004. The only way for the street players to know which dots had already been eaten is by talking to his or her controller. The necessary interaction between street and online players makes Manhattan a hybrid reality game. The goal of Pac-Manhattan was to explore what happens when games are removed from the little world of tabletops, televisions, and computers and placed in the larger real world of street corners and cities. Location-based games, on the other hand, are games that are played with cell phones equipped with location awareness, so triangulation of waves or GPS and the internet connection. Like urban games, location-based mobile games use the city space as the game environment. However, they additionally allow the linking of information to places and players to each other via location awareness. Although location-based games might have an online component, the game takes place primarily in the physical space and on the cell phone screen, as players can see each other or virtual game elements on their mobile screen. It's a great example of a location-based game is geocaching, game where people hide small items at specific GPS coordinates, and you have to navigate yourself to that spot to find one. Check out, see if there's a geocache near you. So Harry Potter, Wizards Unite, Pokemon Go, and Ingress are all examples of hybrid reality games, creating this digital layer that exists over the physical world and then uses your location and the device to kind of situate you as a player both in the physical world but also the digital world. So Ingress is the precursor to Pokemon Go. It was developed by Niantic Labs, a former subsidiary of Google, tasking players with territorializing the material environment through interaction with a mobile-based application. Using their mobile devices, players are equipped with a map of portals, user-submitted locations in the real world, and gameplay consisting of engaging, capturing, and connecting these portals in order to control territory, both territory that is virtual but also very physical. Portals exist not only as nodes within a digital representation of the material space, but also as physical landmarks that bear socio-cultural and material significance prior to their incorporation into the game. These landmarks were submitted by users and were things like cemetery headstones, memorials, statues, and graffiti artwork. So Pokemon Go basically took the map of Ingress, the map of the world and these monuments and locations, and reskinned it as a Pokemon game, an augmented reality location-based mobile game. Obviously it's related to the Pokemon series of games and has gameplay mechanics similarly to do with capture and collection, connected closely to space. So Pokemon were only available at certain spots under certain conditions, so on, and you could view through your phone camera the Pokemon kind of using augmented reality appears in the physical world around the real physical world around you. And so I know some of you won't have played Pokemon Go, so there's an extra video that I prepared on Pokemon Go earlier in the year for my other unit that relates very closely to some of the themes and ideas that we're discussing this week. So I encourage you to check it out if you're interested, particularly if you're doing a location-based serious game for your final assignment. So Pokemon Go is just crazy popular, right? So over 650 million downloads, 100 million in the first month, and it's this ubiquitous location-based mobile game that likely has made over $2 billion in revenue. And so please check out this video if you want to learn more about it. But how do these kinds of games leverage the affordances of the smartphone, right? You've got the camera, which can record what you see, but also can impose and augment the Pokemon over the top of it, giving these kind of virtual objects much more of a physical solution, much more of a physical presence in the real world. If we throw back to our knowledge of augmented reality. The touchscreen is the main source of interaction, but it also relies on your network and the GPS, access to map data, and the ability to locate you on that map, and the gyroscope and accelerometer, which traces the phone, which allows you to kind of use this object as a way to interface with that physical world. How can your mobile serious game, if you're doing a mobile game, use these affordances and technology in Task 3? So what do these location-based mobile games like Pokemon Go mean for what we think about games? Carl Moore, our excellent tutor, but also our location-based game scholar, who wrote his PhD on Ingress, argues that out-of-game materiality informs larger cultural notions of what constitutes play. When playing Ingress, players perform prior local knowledge through their everyday practices of urban mobility, an articulation of understanding the urban environment as a series of navigable routes and material objects. Because the game is about getting from one place to another and capturing as many places as fast as possible, urban play skill is less about the embodied and gestural literacy of engaging with the phone or building an existing gaming literacy from similar games or genres, and more about an articulation of a critical engagement with the urban environment, a demonstration of understanding the urban environment as a series of material objects, as challenges to be overcome, and systems of movement between said objects and locations. And when we start to think about what does really skilled location-based play look like, we can look at examples like this Taiwanese man who rigged his bike with 11 phones to play Pokemon Go as efficiently as possible. Is this what skillful location-based games look like? Because you're overcoming the kind of material limitations of the city through your biking and being able to kind of maximize the efficiency of your play. So games like Ingress shape our experience of that physical space much in the same way as the flaneur and the derive do. It's not just underscored by the material and socio-cultural circumstances of the urban environment, but is also part of a new active process of creating new forms of meaning with regards to these circumstances. As such, Ingress not only builds on the player's local knowledge, but also produces new forms of socio-cultural knowledge through the process of reframing certain actions as play, rather than as functional urban mobility. Within the context of Ingress, street art holds a potential to exist as a digital node of equal value to historical plaques, public libraries, or large commissioned public artworks. This shift, because of the way that these spots of graffiti become landmarks within the game, allows for street art to be viewed as a form of alternative heritage to an urban environment and cultural movements within specific locations. For McDowell, graffiti may be viewed as a form of folk art, subject to newfound romanticism, within the context of this post-graffiti turn. That is, as a form of alternative heritage, graffiti and street art signify historically situated socio-cultural movements and the root of the practice itself. So we're thinking here about how the act of creating these landmarks and submitting them to Ingress to become landmarks within the game kind of makes a claim about what the heritage of that environment is, what is a monument. But we can also question the criteria of portals. What constitutes a cultural monument? What is deemed valuable or historic or of cultural importance and legitimate, and what is left out? And in being left out, what is erased, right? There's very, very few Indigenous landmarks in the Sydney's Ingress or Pokemon Go playable areas, but kind of Western cultural landmarks, buildings, monuments and such often feature quite heavily. So games such as Ingress are working then not only to legitimate street art as a form of cultural heritage via their inclusion in this non-hierarchical network alongside these long-standing institutionalized buildings and artworks, but they also allow players to participate in an archiving of street art through their interactive photography. Graffiti obviously changes over time. The practice of playing Ingress is not just a means of viewing and exploring existing street art, but also a direct process in achieving and curating historically situated works of art. So Pokemon, just as a note here, Pokemon Go is a very social event. Pokemon Go Fest had over 21,000 attendees in 2018, and this is a photo from Ingress, is one of the big Ingress World events where people actually came to Sydney to play this, sitting in front of the Sydney Harbour there. So, sorry, not the Sydney. Well, yeah, I suppose it is in front of the Sydney Harbour. But it's in front of the Opera House with the Sydney Harbour Bridge in the background. But this often caused kind of challenges, as we touched on in the Ethics of Mixed Reality lecture on space, talking about how in roads in Sydney, hundreds of people were congregating in a really great Pokemon Go hotspot where you could very easily walk a short route to be able to hit a lot of different gyms and Pokestops in a short amount of time, where there were really good Pokemon, to the point where the residents of these apartment buildings all called the police. And as mentioned in that week as well, examples from Pokemorbid, the ways that the game, which was playable everywhere, could be played at funeral homes, at Holocaust memorials, re-identifying how socio-cultural constructions of space are really challenged by location-based games. The encoded rules of the game versus what is considered appropriate behaviour within a particular physical space. Often these games ignore that entirely. So another kind of critical issue and lens that we can bring to location-based games like Ingress and Pokemon Go is how they represent significant sites of user labour, in line with theories of digital labour, fan labour, and immaterial labour. Portals are submitted by users and approved based on a number of Niantic's own criteria. For the first few years of Pokemon Go, you couldn't add any more portals. It was just the portals that had been transplanted from Ingress to Pokemon Go. And in that transformation is one of the really big problems for why Pokemon Go kind of caused a lot of controversy. Because Ingress, the portals are kind of cultural landmarks, and as a result, this kind of spiritual thing comes out of them. So it wasn't so much about transforming that statue into a Pokemon gym, but as recognizing it as a cultural landmark where these spirits are coming out of. But Pokemon Go reskins that landmark and says this is not a memorial, this is not a statue, this is a Pokemon gym, this is a Pokemon stop. and in doing so, that there was a lot of friction with that kind of re-articulation. But these data sets are really valuable. Ingress's data set has been used to make Pokemon Go, it's been used to make a Settlers of Catan game, it's been used to make the Harry Potter game, it is used to inform Foursquare, which was an early check-in game where you could become the mayor of a place, has been used to inform locations in apps like Instagram. So this is what Julian Kuklik calls playbook, where the play becomes a productive form of labor, creating market value for the companies. The walk directions on Google Maps is informed by data from Pokemon Go players, how they moved from space to space, what was possible, at what speed it was possible to do it. So we can also think about how location-based mobile games can be serious games. Now, there's a long history of mobile games being used as like exagames, which is something that I really want you to avoid in this assignment, because I think fitness-based games can be tricky for this particular assignment, because although it's definitely possible to make an exercise game and encourage people to be fit through gameplay, I think it's a really good example of chocolate-covered broccoli. That is definitely more delicious than broccoli, but it's still not what we're looking for, because it's not through the. It's difficult to articulate a fitness-based game where people's fitness is through the play of the game, but more in a more kind of complicated or interesting way than just Pokemon Go, but with, you know, Sonic characters or something. What I want you to be thinking about if you're going to try and tackle serious games, serious location-based games, is can you mobilize the way that like location-based play changes our experience of place? Can you get someone into someone else's experience of the world, or get people to engage with cultural heritage in a new way? I think that and understanding how the kind of play of the game operationalizes that, I think is where you could really do a really great assignment here. So to sum up, we've been playing in urban spaces for some time. This has been intensified through mobile phones and mobile gaming, particularly locative gaming. Locative play challenges how we think about video game play, and it also complicates how we think about place and other kinds of games and play. We might also think critically about it, and the political economy and issues of labour or playbour that surround it. So that wraps up our Week 11 lecture on locative games. This has been a short lecture by about 10 minutes, because next week is going to be a bit longer, because I really wanted to go through a lot of different ways of talking about game design for your final assignment. So great to see you. Looking forward to seeing you next week, and hope you have a great day. Catch you later.